Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making it out this evening. It's very good to see people out here that are committed and interested in the process. I have received some inquiries, as you might imagine, to communicate some preferences to our consultant that's leading the design portion of our efforts here. And I'm very pleased to report, actually, that it is a good faith effort that they're having to make sure that there isn't outside influences and biases reflected in their products. Because I can say, similarly to how I said previously in the first iteration, that I had heard from the landowner that they were expressing some frustration and not being able to get through fully to the consultant, that I actually wasn't able to get the call returned. And I say that not in a tongue-in-cheek kind of fashion. I say that in a manner that I think indicates that they're doing a good job in holding true to what they promised to deliver, which is essentially a neutral, objective kind of evaluation followed by design. And so presumably Ben Sigmund of EPS has done the pro formas and can tell us about what is financially feasible and how that constructs some parameters with regard to our particular area economically. And the Opticos team is here. Dan Perlick is here, as well as Bill Lennertz again. I want to thank Katarina Kidd from our city staff for sticking with this, and it's been a very multi-pronged project. And without further ado, I know there aren't a whole lot of people here tonight, but of course this is on video, and I'm sure it's going to be scrutinized. And so let's give a big round of applause and welcome to Dan Perlick of Opticos.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is great to be back. The team has been doing a lot since the second charrette, and we've had the online survey, and it's just nice to be back in the studio to do a lot more testing and truthing and sort of studying alternatives for the concepts that we delivered in the first charrette process. I do want to start just because this is a very passionate community with some rules of engagement. I think they worked pretty well in the first charrette process, and we just want to stick again, just to make the best use of everybody's time and be respectful of everybody's opinions, is that we want to make sure everybody that we all listen actively and respectfully. Second of all, that we balance the speaking times. Thirdly, please avoid dominating the discussion. Fourthly, please stick to critiquing ideas and not people. Right, we're all doing our best here, and we know people have thoughts and concerns, and we're happy to hear them, but let's not start critiquing people. And then please stay on topic. We're here to get your input. Let's stay on topic. Let's give us your thoughts, and let us integrate them into the process to date. So I wanted to start by talking about first of all, what we hope to accomplish through the course of the next several days over this second charrette, because I think our messaging, and to be quite honest, our approach has changed a little bit based on sort of stepping back and assessing the first charrette, starting to get some information from our transportation and our economists. The great thing about the first charrette is, and I think this is really important, we didn't feel like we came to any final conclusions, and that wasn't the point of that first charrette process, but it established a really solid foundation for us as we studied the two alternatives, or the multiple alternatives that sort of got whittled down to 2 to 4 alternatives. And I think they're a really great foundation for further testing and investigation. Ben and his team at EPS were able to start sharpening their pencils with the numbers. Alta started sharpening their pencils with the transportation demand management strategy. We were just sort of stepping back after an exhausting week and actually looking a little bit more clearly at what we generated at the end of that process to sharpen our own pencils as well. And I think what's important to mention is that The primary focus now is not for us to come up with the one design solution. Like, it's not our job to design the project. It's our job to work with you to define a set of parameters that will go into the specific plan as policy and guidance, and then ultimately will be reinforced by the new set of zoning in the form-based code that will be the rules by which the new development will get designed and built by the property owner and their architect. So I think that's really, really important to remember. We're not actually designing the project. But what's important, so we're going to be thinking about, as we think about how we regulate for that predictable implementation, we think about things like, you'll hear this a lot, the street and block network. Where are new streets required, and where might they be optional, just in terms of that connectivity we talked about. The overall circulation network, how do bikes get through the site, how do pedestrians get to the site, how do cars get into the site, to the site, into parking, all those different elements. We'll be looking very carefully about heights, where are there appropriate heights in different locations? How do we transition into the different neighborhoods appropriately? Thinking about that concept of the town square and what's a minimum size? What different types of shapes and parameters might that take? How might it be activated? And then looking also very carefully at the street design parameters, because we can't just simply say we need a street here and assume that it's going to be a well-designed street that's good for bikes and pedestrians, so we need to give some parameters around that as well. So we're going to be looking at all of those different elements and more over the course of the next several days in this second charrette process. So this is going to be really quick, because most of you have participated in that. Just a really quick summary of the community engagement process to date. It's been actually fairly extensive. And we just continue to come back to this notion of the feedback loops and sort of getting feedback from you, the team distilling it through our economists, through our transportation consultant, sort of spitting out a set of alternatives after we got that information from you all. And so this charrette's just the next iteration of those feedback loops. Right, there was some initial community engagement that was stakeholder meetings, one-on-one meetings, group meetings. We went to the high school. We did the kickoff workshop, and there's just a lot of different ways that we engaged the community, got just a ton of really good feedback over the course of those several months of feedback through those different processes. And at the first charrette, I'll be the first to admit, I wish we had had a few hundred more people coming through the charrette, but there were several hundred people over the course of the week that came to the brown bag lunches, just wandered through studio, came to the opening and closing workshop. So we felt that we actually made some really good progress over the course of that 4.5 days of that first charrette process. And right, then there's the online engagement. And if you haven't been there already, it's at envisionvalco.org. We sort of had a series of questions that were asked prior to the first charrette that we had basically almost 4,000 unique users to the site prior to the charrette, so we were distilling that information as well. And then currently, sort of post-charrette, we actually put up the charrette information onto Civic Comment, which is a process by which we gather additional feedback on the ideas that were generated at the charrette process. And basically, to date, we've gotten about just a little under 300 comments from about 40 different people. I'll say there are a few of you that are extremely passionate about sort of giving comments on the website. I think that's really fantastic. And anybody can view the comments. The comments are available for viewing from everybody. Our team just closed this civic comment process on Thursday, so I'd say we're still distilling those comments, and we will continue to do so over the course of this week. But you can see, based on this pie chart, just some general primary concerns that came up. Is the number one was sort of parks and open spaces and civic uses. Was about a third of the folks made that as a really high priority. And then the second was general design. I guess that's quality of the streetscape environment, quality of the buildings, quality of the connections that we talked about over the course of that process. So we will continue to digest those comments over the course of this week and integrate those into the evolutions and the refinements that we make as we move through the course of this second charrette. So as I mentioned, we really see that first charrette as an investigation and exploration. And we learned a lot from that. And so we wanted to come back and sort of give you a sense of what we feel are the types of concepts that we feel there's primary community support for, that we can pull forward fairly comfortably. And there's other aspects of the plan that we feel still need some back and forth with the community to get a clear sense of what the direction might be for those elements of the specific plan. And I think the first of these, which seems very straightforward, but we like to start with the consensus elements, is that the community is very committed to wanting this downtown for Cupertino and this town square, this vibrant downtown. And this was a policy that was introduced in the general plan. It's not something that we came up with, so this is simply us sort of grabbing onto that idea and beginning to illustrate the ways that this vibrant downtown can be implemented on the Vallco site. And so once again, I do want to mention that this is not about the one viable, trying to pick and design the one viable solution to get you that. It's about us setting the range of parameters that can ultimately deliver a vibrant downtown environment on this site for you as a community. Right. For those of you who participated in this charrette, we focused on 2 alternatives with a set of sub-alternatives. I'm not going to go into detail on these. You can look at them online or come to the studio and look at them as well. But we did one scheme, for example, that had the plaza right along Wolf Road as an alternative that had a large-scale entertainment pavilion. That was the focus of the Civic Plaza space, and we have a series of drawings to reinforce that. We also looked at a scheme that had the town square internal to the western side of the site, west of Wolf Road. And we discussed and showed some of the merits of that alternative. And so I think part of this is there are shared elements even between those 2 alternatives that we can start to list and understand that how can a developer and their team take a set of policies, a vision, and some of the form-based code regulations and create a real high-quality town center environment using that direction. Another element that we thought there was fairly clear sort of support for was a thoughtful transition to the context, especially as the Blaney neighborhood, as you move to the west. And so we thought very carefully about that as we drew our design concepts. We illustrated these drawings and showed it in the model as well. Now, we do need to continue to test the viability of sort of how those buildings scale down and how it impacts the viability of the larger project, knowing that you may need to shift that development from that edge sort of further into the project if that's a direction that we want to go with the specific plan and the form-based code. The other aspect of that transition that we felt that we heard a fairly large support for was thinking about a public space on that western edge as part of that transition. And once again, that would be along assuming the perimeter road continues north into the site. And once again, we still need to continue to study the viability of that, but we heard the community liked that idea, and so we're going to sort of continue to flush that out and explore that in different ways that could be achieved over the course of this week and ultimately within the specific plan. This idea of creating sort of, I guess, fixing existing streets and creating new streets that have a pedestrian orientation is a concept that we felt seems very basic, but it's a really important one to creating a vibrant downtown environment that we're continuing to pull through and we'll continue to focus on over the course of this week and generate some more of those details. And a few more here. Diverse housing choice, right? Obviously, housing on this site is a really important part of this conversation. We heard some really creative ideas of, well, could we look at exploring innovative housing formats like co-housing? It could be senior co-housing. It could be, doesn't need to be age-restricted housing. Obviously, the conversation about affordable housing and below market rate units and what percentage is included in the site is going to be an ongoing conversation and kind of one of those elements of the program that there'll be some back and forth on in terms of costs and sort of viability. And I think ultimately, right, one of the other points is, back to that discussion about taller buildings, if so, where those taller buildings might go. And so, we're going to continue that conversation. What's the benefit of getting those taller buildings? What might you get in exchange for those? And then a really great idea that came out of various stakeholder interviews and different folks who were filtering through the studio with different backgrounds of this idea of an innovation center or an innovation hub. And that could take on a lot of different aspects. It could have a school component. It could have a wide variety of educational institutions involved in that. There could be maker spaces. There could be a housing affiliated that. So this was a program idea that is I would just say it's a challenging one to figure out how to integrate and how to integrate it in a way that actually is viable for the developer. But we felt that it came from enough different sources that we felt we wanted to continue to pull this through and study it as this process continues to evolve. Okay, this sort of based on that, that survey, we really understand that the amount and the quality of public spaces is one of the primary interests of this community. And so we have that on our radar. I would say a couple of things, is that the reality is that without a scheme, with a scheme that does not have the green roof, is you're not going to get 30 acres of public space. Like, it's nearly impossible to accommodate that at ground level, and nor would I necessarily recommend that in an environment where you're trying to create a vibrant downtown, because I would ask you to give me names of other vibrant downtowns that have large, expansive open spaces, and it's just not a common thing. So we're continuing to think about this. And I'll say this, that I liked Bill Leonard's analogy of our team being the taxi driver for you all in the community in terms of sort of bringing this specific plan vision forward. And I will say that the green roof to us it has an aspect of an experiment. It's experimental, I'll say. And a lot of these types of experiments that have been built in the recent past, there's just a lot of room for them to go wrong, I will say. So I'll just say that as a team, we felt that we wanted to steer you toward a more sort of tried and true direction of a downtown urban environment that is composed of a series of street and blocks that enables it to evolve over time, and that hopefully in 150 years, 200 years, that framework is still in place and is being reinforced, is adapting and evolving. So that's our thoughts on that green roof. Now I'll say, I picked this image because I want to say we're not against green roofs. And this is an image of a building with a series of terraced green roofs on them. There's no reason we can't consider or even encourage green roofs on individual buildings. So that's just a thought for you to process and to continue to communicate with us about. So since the first charrette, right, we've continued to investigate and explore and think about these ideas that we put forward. And I would say one of the biggest concerns we heard at the end of the first charrette was related to the program. I'm not going to go through the exact program we studied for the alternatives, but I just want to show this is a summary of the program ranges we studied in the alternatives. It was about 411 to 436,000 square feet of retail, about 1.3 to 2 million square feet of office, about 2,400 housing units, and 45 to 65,000 square feet of civic use. And those were the parameters. And we heard some real concerns from participants, in particular at the end of that process, that the questions were, why didn't we study more retail? Pretty good question. And why didn't we study less office space? So we put it on ourselves to say, hey, we feel that we heard this from the community. We needed to go back and sharpen our pencils and do a little bit more study and work with Ben and his team to explore more specifically some of these broader range of program alternatives. So we've actually done that. So what you'll hear from Ben, and I'm going to let Ben spend a little bit of time on this with a little bit more of the detail, is what we have looked at since then is a program range of retail that goes up to the 600,000 square feet. And I'm going to say a little bit about that in a second. That's the minimum required currently in your general plan. And it sort of studies sort of the lower end, or Ben will talk this, what we feel the lower end of viability is in the office program, which is 750,000 square feet. And of course, by thinking about, these are dials. if when you dial certain programs down, other programs need to grow to make that project viable. So within that scenario, you do need to elevate and raise the number of residential units to just a little over 3,000. Ben's going to talk a little bit more to make that program, based on our initial assessments, to make that program viable. So we're working on that. I would say we heard from the community. We sort of went back and we started exploring some broader ranges of those program alternatives. I just wanted to send a couple of messages because we know this is a real sticking point with a lot of community members, is that we feel in our professional experience that you can absolutely create a vibrant retail and entertainment environment with 400 to 600,000 square feet of program. Absolutely can be done. It's done in a lot of different places. Santana Row just down the street as a comparison, not that we're trying to recreate Santana Row, it's 600,000 square feet. It's pretty big. And it probably, if they were going to do that today, they would do it differently. So I just want, just as a comparison, but we do want to say that we feel we can achieve the community's goals for a vibrant downtown with that range of square footage. The second point that I want to make is related to the office. And you keep hearing this, the office is the one component that has the biggest impact on viability. But we also feel that any great downtown has a really nice mix of office, housing, and retail, because those office users will come down during the middle of the day and support those businesses. So it helps increase the viability of a downtown. And so we're feeling pretty good about the program range that we're studying for the offices. And we could think about, I know a couple of people in the audience here even that participate in the Charrette, we're talking about, let's think about some more creative range of office users. So think about some of your institutional sort of institutions in the community and whether or not they might take some of that office space. It could be medical uses. It could be services like a dentist or an optometrist, or the services you would expect to have in a downtown environment. Not necessarily in a shopping mall, but you're trying to create a downtown here. So we're thinking very carefully about that. We've had some great conversations with the school district, and the League of Women's Voters actually had a great forum last Monday on this, and had them as part of Polly, as part of Bove, as part of the panel. The school districts we've talked to all the school districts. They're actually more concerned about two things. They're less concerned about overcrowding. They're more concerned about the dropping numbers of students, number one. Number two, their number one concern is their inability to retain teachers. The most talented teachers are leaving because they can't afford to live in these communities. So those are the real concerns we're hearing from the school districts. So I just wanted to continue to reinforce that. We actually have a brown bag tomorrow that I'm going to talk about in just a second, where the school district has offered to come tomorrow and give a presentation and answer questions related to their findings and related to demand for the schools. What needs further investigation? Once again, this conversation about tall buildings, not an easy one to have in a lot of places, including here. Part of this, so this is the view down Vallco Parkway into the western side where the theater currently is, but we just introduced this idea of, the taller buildings, how tall, if there should be tall buildings, if so, how tall, where they should be located, and really probably most importantly is what is the benefit, what are you getting in exchange for enabling taller buildings to happen on the site? So we're continuing to give that further thought as we work our way through the course of this week. We're continuing to think about transportation demand management, and it sounds like this is really, really important to the success of this project. And Hugh at Alta they're just beginning to generate sort of these packages of transportation demand management alternatives. There's a ton of work to do still, I will say. And we're going to just continue to sharpen our pencils as we move forward related to transportation demand management, because we do feel that it's critical to the success of this project and critical to the success of this being built out in a way that feels and functions like a vibrant downtown, not a bunch of parking and supporting retail, office, and residential uses. So I'm actually going to have, obviously, there have been some further refinements related to the economics. I'm going to have Ben Sigmund stand up and give his presentation about some of the work that they've been doing to support us in refining these program alternatives and thinking about the viability of them.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out on Monday night. So I am the team's number guy. I'm your number guy. So I wanted to start tonight with a number, pretty big number, 320 million, okay? I was trying to think of ways to contextualize that on my way over. It's basically the size of the country, every single person, woman, man, and child in this country, 325 million of us, $320 million. The research that I have says that's what Sandhill Partners have paid for Vallco. Okay, it's a tremendous amount of money. And I want to say that because you can't make a project work if it's too small. The fact that they've spent this much money demands a project of scale, okay? And so I always like to say land is worth what you can do with it. And in this case, we're starting with the land cost, and so we know we have to do something pretty significant. And so all the programs we've tested are this kind of scale. And we're talking about trade-offs between housing, retail, office, civic uses, other uses. But we're talking about a 5 million square foot project, or nearly 6 million square foot project. And that's what the economics demand, and that's the honest truth. So let me walk you through this. We're going to kind of get into the method here that we're using first off, okay? This is a very traditional view of land use economics. We start with value, what the market will support in terms of the sale value of the project, all the uses in it, and we start to subtract off what it takes to get you there. You have to plan it, you have to do all the architecture and engineering, permitting, so on and so forth. We call those soft costs. You have to have hard costs too. That's the actual construction cost of the project. All that is in my development cost. We subtract that off. And then if you want someone to put money at risk, to go spend hundreds of millions of dollars, actually billions of dollars here to build this kind of project, they need a return on investment. So we incorporate that too. You have to motivate the money or nothing's going to happen. In this case, we know the land cost, so that we subtract that off. And if there's anything positive at the bottom, that project residual there, the project probably can happen, okay? And maybe there's even a little bit of room in there for some more community benefits. But that's our approach here, so, and very typical in the industry. Here are the programs we tested. We worked in concert with Opticos, and this is very similar to what Dan just presented. This is a range, and you can see at the bottom this 5.4 to 5.6 million square feet all in, the commercial and the residential, ranging from 3,200 or so to 2,600 or so units. And then you can see the office program, the sort of upper that we're using, this 1.5 million, and then having it in the other alternative, the range of retail 400 to 600, and then we've also got a hotel in this program as well. Across all of these that we've tested, there are a few things we hold constant. We put in this 5 acres of park. We've got 65,000 square feet of civic space. That's essentially a new city hall or equivalent. It would be built in an office-like structure and delivered free of charge. We're applying no rent to this whatsoever, and it would be delivered essentially warm shell, sort of unfinished for the city to fit out. And then we have quite a bit of subterranean parking. It's not the 100% subterranean parking we see in the SB 35 proposal, but a significant amount of subterranean parking that kind of keeps the cars out of view and makes the project work, allows us to fit the uses on the surface at these sort of lower height levels. Okay, I'll give you just a sense of what we're coming up with in terms of values. We're looking at rental apartments. We think the market will pay $800,000 or $900,000 each for those rental apartments. That would be an institutional investor. Those are pretty big dollars for that kind of product, and these are relatively big units in our preliminary runs. But this is supportable, we think. And then you can see the below market rate units. Okay, and so we've got about a $500,000 gap on each of those relative to the market. So I'll show you in a moment what that means for land value. But suffice it to say, when you hit the AMI, the area median incomes for these low market units, the ability to pay is about $300,000 to $350,000. And then condos. We did sort of hear from the community interest in condos, and I think it's a way to generate some more value. We're putting those at just over $1 million, and they cost a bit more to build, which I'll show you in a minute, but we think you can run up the project value using some for sale product in there as well. Office, $1,000 to $1,200 per square foot. Retail, anywhere from $400 to $900, depending on what kind of tenant you might have. These large entertainment, we call them, tenants like the skating rink or the bowling alley won't be able to pay so much rent. Other tenants, as we know, tech companies will pay a lot of rent, thus the range. And then the hotel, about $700 or $800 a foot in value for that kind of use.
For those of us who are compulsive note takers, are these going to be up on the website?
Yes. Yes, we'll make these slides available, and I'm sorry to just read through them, but let me just complete it, and I'll be here after to talk to you guys about these numbers too. Cost side, apartments, $625 to $725 just to build, and that's without any of the site costs. So that doesn't include your sewer, water, utilities, landscaping, any of that stuff. That's just to build it. It does include, though, the necessary return on investment. Condominiums, we think, because of the insurance liability, having a building full of people who need to be happy with the product, as well as the quality of the product the market demands, those are more expensive to build, almost $100,000 more each. And then you can see the commercial costs. Again, this is vertical development, so the architecture planning, permits and fees, all those soft costs, all the construction and the developer's return to actually go take the trouble and do it, put that money at risk, but none of the horizontal development, as we call it, so none of this site work is done. So this gives us a sense, if I flick to the next one here, of about how much value each of these uses will generate towards the land on a per square foot basis. And so, again, you can see the things on the right, all the things we're not counting yet. For every market rate unit, we think you can generate $150 or $200 a foot towards that land cost. Below market rate, it's a negative, right? It's setting us back, and it's what we're doing to, keep these teachers and firefighters and everything else. Condominium, a little bit more value to the land, and then, as you can see, office, the most valuable. And this is why we keep talking about the importance of keeping office on this site. Not only the points like Dan made about creating daytime users who are, visiting the retail, but also it is a significant driver of land value here. Going on, the Civic shows up as just a negative because that's space the developer would give away to the city. And then retail, as you can see, if you're able to successfully tenant it, and I think that's our worry, our market study I think comes out publicly tomorrow. And if you came to the brown bag, we have deep concerns about filling up a significant amount of retail space. But if you fill it, we think in some instances you can drive some value to the land, but most of these entertainment uses, they're gonna be a subsidy, something that the other uses in the project cover. And the hotel, pretty risky, probably after a return on investment, not driving a lot of value to the land. So that's kind of I think in my mind, I call this the trade-off slide. It really helps you think about if you want to move towards one use and away from another at the margin with these big programs, the kind of trade-offs we're going to be making. A huge, uncertain, but important piece of this is how much it's going to take to deal with the land. Demolition, okay? A significant amount of backbone infrastructure, the sewer, water, utilities, et cetera. And then, this project, if it does go through CEQA, is going to have tremendous offsite impacts that they have to take care of, different types of intersection improvements, so on and so forth. We have some engineering estimates for just the backbone infrastructure. We know that piece to be about $50 million. We also know if you change the scheme, that number can move dramatically. Our engineer advised us that if we move to the fully subterranean parking, the challenges associated with the civil engineering can double the cost of that infrastructure. So take it from $50 to $100 million just to put your streets in with sewer, water, and utilities. So we're talking big dollars, and that's a bit of a question mark for us still. So we're not going to tell you today, exactly to the penny what we think is going on here, but what I can say is both these programs we studied are in the realm of feasibility. They both can be done. We've traded off a good chunk of office, but we've brought in a lot of housing to compensate, and we think we've made ourselves whole given what we know today. So I'm going to pass it on for some talk about transportation. It's Patrick, right?
Yes.
All right, here you go.
Thanks.
Can you take one question?
After.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, thank you. My name is Patrick Sigman. I'm with Sigman & Associates. And I want to walk you through a toolkit of potential traffic reduction strategies for this site. And these strategies are a beginning point for further conversation with you tonight and subsequently. And I've put them together based on my 25 years of working as a transportation planner here in the Bay Area, really specifically focused since the beginning of my career on how do we make great places that are economically successful and yet reduce traffic. So the beginning of my career was that I was a Stanford student. Stanford both had a parking shortage and also was under a mandate to produce all of its new development, some 5 million square feet of new development, with no additional peak hour trips on the roadways outside of campus. So basically add 20% in size to the campus with no increase in motor vehicle traffic. Now, of course, this site is not Stanford University, but I learned a lot of lessons. Starting there and continuing in subsequent projects. They fall into two categories. One is regulating parking at projects like this, and second is improving people's transportation choices. And they're both critical. And here's one example of why. A few years ago, we were hired by Genentech to help with their master plan. The campus is in South San Francisco, east of 101, just out there in the middle of office parks. They had a 77% drive-alone rate. We put together a plan with them that has, over the last, well, at the time this graph was shown, it was 6 years, but it's continued since, brought them down from 77% driving alone to about 58%. So basically, the number of people walking, biking, taking transit doubled in that time. And the key to this success was actually both parking reform and improving choices. On the parking side, we realized, oh, the city had regulations that made us build far more parking than we needed, even if every single employee drove to work alone. And then also they had a trip reduction ordinance that said, well, after you build tens of millions of dollars of expensive new parking structures, you need to find ways to get 40% of the employees to not use them. And as we worked with the staff, everybody said, okay, this makes no sense. We wound up canceling many of those parking garages and funneling the savings into traffic reduction, which also meant that employees didn't need to bring so many cars. So, regulating parking at developments. First thing we need to do is protect all nearby residents from spillover parking onto their streets. So one approach is to let existing residents continue to park free on their streets, just like they always have. It's really useful, however, to limit the number of permits that you give out to the number of curb spaces that are actually available. Don't do what Boston did. They gave out 4,000 permits in Beacon Hill and then discovered 10 years later when they counted they had 983 curb parking spaces, right? So Tucson does this. And then second, you can require new development to pay for the cost of establishing and maintaining those residential parking permit districts, because it's really quite a minor cost compared to the cost of building more parking structures. So Kaiser did this in Oakland. They pay for all the surrounding residential parking permit districts. And then you can start asking, okay, now how do we start saving money on parking? Well, first you look at what does it cost? Well, this is what does it cost to add a parking space by building a new above-ground parking structure. So here's a beautiful parking structure. It's about $50,000 per parking space gained here in the Bay Area. So what do you need to break even on the cost of building and operating a $50,000 parking space? Well, you need to generate about $335 a month in revenue. So at 22 work days a month, well, that's a good deal more than $10 per day per employee to supply them with parking. So the corollary is anything that a community can do to reduce parking demand for less than $335 a month is a bargain, right? Because then you save on parking costs and you can use it to help employees get to work other ways. And you can use it on a residential project. So for example, the Gaia building in Berkeley, they said, well, let's separate the cost of parking from the cost of actually renting an apartment. You can do this for condominiums too. So the city requires that, and it's now turned it into a downtown ordinance in the plan we did for them. So at the Gaia building, it's $150 a month to rent each parking space you want, but you don't have to rent any. They're also required to provide on-site car sharing cars. So now they have 91 apartments, a theater, a cafe, and an office space in this building. They only built 42 parking spaces. Now, they wound up with 237 adult residents with just 20 cars. A mix of students at nearby UC Berkeley, downtown workers. So you would not get these results here at this site in Cupertino, but the principle applies, right? The principle's the same. Here in Cupertino, you would wind up with higher car ownership rates, but it's the principle I want to share. So the idea is you unbundle the cost of parking from the cost of other goods and services. Rents then have to be lower when you charge a separate parking fee in order to remain competitive in the marketplace, because nobody will pay that. So the cost of parking is now revealed to the user, whether it's somebody leasing office space or resident. So people can now actually save money by using less parking, which means driving less usually. And what you get is less parking demand, less congestion, less pollution. So how do you unbundle it? Well, you can do hourly or daily fees in, for example, an office situation. You can do monthly fees in residential. You can do parking condominiums, actually, where with new condominiums, like we require in San Francisco, you buy and sell them separately from the actual condominium space. So when you apply this to offices, Bellevue, Washington is a great example. They used to be a bedroom suburb outside of Seattle, no office to speak of. They said, we want to build a big downtown with real serious office buildings. Unfortunately, they didn't get the greatest architects back in the mid-90s when they started. But the principle here is they require building owners to include the parking costs as a separate line item in the leases. The minimum rate back in 2003 was $144 a month, was the minimum rate that a building owner could charge a tenant. So now they wound up with the drive alone commute rate fell by about 30%. So from 81% driving alone to 57%, just through this measure. Now the thing is the tenants, the companies that moved in, many of them did not charge their own employees to park. But what they did instead is they did parking cash out. The idea is parking cash out means that if you don't park at work, then you get cash instead. You get the cash value of your parking space. There's a program I helped start at Stanford University. So for example, at Genentech in South San Francisco, one of the things we did was we instituted a parking cash out where you get $4 a day as an employee for every day that you don't drive, every day that you don't park at Genentech. Santa Monica requires this by city ordinance. And what you see is if you do a parking cash out of about $165 a month, you get about a 30% reduction in employees driving to work. These are studies from Southern California. And then you work on improving transportation choices. So once you've separated the parking cost from the cost of, say, renting a place or an office, now car sharing actually becomes viable. That is, you can have a car in your building that you rent by the hour of the day. For example, I don't own a car anymore, but I grabbed one to come down here for these days. It also supports bike sharing. So bike sharing works really well in those places where people can save money by using less parking. And of course, now the bike sharing places are offering electric bike share, which is really good on a hot August day in Cupertino, right? Deep discount transit passes. So many employers here in Silicon Valley offer this and have gotten good results. The example that I had at hand of before-after results is in Boulder, where every single employee in downtown Boulder gets a free transit pass. They buy these at a deeply discounted group purchase rate from the regional transit agency. So they only pay $83 for each worker to get free transit. But what they got is, in Boulder, the drive-alone rate went from 56% of employees driving to 36%. Now here, you probably won't get as strong a result, especially not at first, because the transit service at present just is not very good, right? But the principle applies, and you have to build on what you have. Don't let those buses run empty. And the last thing is, we need to realize that, autonomous shuttles are here. You've probably seen autonomous vehicles running around the Bay Area. This happens to be an autonomous shuttle that started operating this month at University of Michigan on public streets. So these shuttles, there's no steering wheel, no brake pedal, no accelerator, just a stop button. So these are now running at low speeds, up to 25 miles an hour on public streets. Similarly, Easy Mile is running back and forth to Cowboys games from remote lots. They just began running on public streets to go to BART from San Ramon in a big office park and are just up and running. Now, what does this mean? Well, for the time being, they still have an operator on board, kind of like early elevators had an operator just to reassure the public. But as these are getting better, the thing is that about 80% of the cost of running transit is the driver. So even with some fairly expensive equipment to make the self-driving work, what we're seeing is that a few years from now, we will have a situation where we can run 4 times as much transit service for the same price. So instead of a bus that runs every 20 minutes on a route, you can run a much smaller bus every 5 minutes. And what that means is that all the predictions are that the cost of running self-driving shuttles and taxis is going to plummet. And there's nothing comparable in sight for parking technology that would drive down costs. So what that means is we're already seeing a steady drop in parking demand in many places due to ride-hailing, like Lyft and Uber. It's going down about 1% a year in San Francisco. But when you start adding self-driving and the costs for self-driving vehicles come way down, you get an even greater drop in parking. And if we put in place the right framework, we can get a big drop in drive-alone motor vehicle trips as well as we make transit much more convenient. So that's the list of strategies I just showed. There are more, but in the interest of time, I want to stop there. Main thing I want to say is, traffic congestion is really a choice and not our fate. We actually can meaningfully reduce it.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Patrick. I'm just going to wrap up here. I just wanted to very quickly go through the agenda for this week because it is a little bit different than the charrette last week. Basically, I just want to, we had an open house and an opening presentation today. The closing presentation will be Thursday from 6 to 7:30 in the community hall here to wrap up this event. We hope to see you between now and then. Polly Bovey is actually, I forgot her statistician's actually going to come with her tomorrow. I think Tom is his name. And she offered very graciously to give a session tomorrow on sort of the school district's assessment on enrollment and talk about what sort of impact or not a project like Vallco would have on their future enrollment. So that's at 5:30 to 7 o'clock here tomorrow. So I do encourage you to attend if that's of interest to you. And it's Tom Williams. He's the chief demographer for the school district with Polly being here. So that they're very gracious to do that. So we hope to see you here tomorrow for that. And then we have open houses. We did one today. We have another one from 4 to 7 p.m. on Wednesday. And then our typical open studio where we actually will open up our studios for you starting tomorrow from 4 to 7 and then on Wednesday from 10 to 1. So I do encourage you to drop in. You can look at the model, some of the drawings that we're generating, and the additional refinements that we're making as we're all, our multi-disciplinary team are sharpening our pencils to move this project forward. And so I do want to mention, just in terms of some bigger picture next steps post second charrette, is that we actually have a council working session on June 4th. That's coming up here soon. It's just a little over a week after the end of the charrette. We're looking at delivering there's an admin draft that we're going to create that's an internal draft in June. There'll be there'll be an EIR council working session in June as well, and then we'll be delivering the first public review draft at the end of July, sort of beginning of August. So that's coming up pretty quickly, so this is some really important milestone dates. And then according to the schedule that's been defined to date, actually by October, the final public review draft should be in front of council in October. So wanted you to be aware of those dates, those important milestones. And what we're going to do right now is, at the first charrette, we actually found it really invaluable to do these breakouts. So Patrick Sigmund's going to be over in this corner here to talk about parking, transportation, and TDM, some of the thoughts that he put forward. Ben will be available up here in the front corner. And then the Opticos team will be available in the back corner to talk about any of the questions, thoughts, concerns you have related to ideas that came out of the first charrette, some of these refined ideas that came out of my presentation today. So we will stick around and sort of answer your questions and have a good conversation with you. I please do encourage you to not only continue to come back, but encourage others within the community to come back as well. The more people that come, the more successful this process can be. We are jumping into some really refined thoughts related to how to effectively integrate some of these ideas into the specific plan, and ultimately how to effectively regulate them in this new code document. So we're going to be doing that over the course of the week. So thank you for coming tonight. We look forward to having a conversation with you, and we hope to see you again this week.